guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited for today's video. It is one of my favorites to film during eyeshadow palette week. I hope you guys are enjoying eyeshadow palette week. Today we were going to be talking about how many times I used each of the eyeshadow palettes within my collection during the course of the last 3 months. I like to update you guys quarterly, and I'm really excited for my end of the year wrap up when we get to talk about my most used palettes versus my least used. I've started to compile the last 3 months and see like which palettes have gotten the most versus the least, and it's crazy to look at some of like my favorite palettes in my collection that really haven't gotten touched. So I'm really excited for that wrap up video. If you guys are newer or new to this style of video from me, I only talk about palettes that I've used 5+ times. Anything that I don't talk about today has basically been used anywhere from 1 to 4 times. And any eyeshadow palettes that I have not used at all in the last 3 months, I have decided to declutter, or I have been decluttering. I might change that up a little bit. I have purchased a ton of palettes over the course of the last couple of months, so I've been trying to like test everything out. There is only one eyeshadow palette that I am going to be decluttering today, and that is my Nabla Poison Garden palette, and that's actually already listed on my Poshmark, so I'm not going to grab it out to share or like hold it up for you guys. I just don't enjoy that palette, and even if I go through 3 months and I don't use a palette but I still want to keep it, I'm gonna do that. But doing this exercise has been really eye-opening for me, just to see what palettes I am actually reaching for versus the ones I'm not, and it has been making some of my declutter decisions a little bit easier. But that is the only palette we're decluttering this month, and if you guys are interested in hearing about which palettes have gotten the most love from me the last 3 months versus which ones haven't gotten as much love, stay tuned. First, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I would love if you would consider subscribing before you leave today. I do post a minimum of 4 times a week. I love to talk about eyeshadow palettes. I love to talk about any makeup in general. And we do a lot of project pans. We can't speak on this channel. We do a lot of project pans on this channel as well. So if you aren't yet subscribed, I would love if you would subscribe before moving on. But other than that, let's just get into this video. I am super, super, super hungry, but I'm waiting till after I film this to eat. Alright, you guys, so the last 3 months I have brought quite a few different eyeshadow palettes into my collection, some quads, some palettes, etc. So I feel like I've had a wider spread of my palette usage than normal. I also feel like I don't have as many palettes that have like a ton of usage on them. Now, from the 3 to 5 range, so reaching for a palette anywhere from 3 to 5 times, I actually have 10 eyeshadow palettes falling in that category, but I'm only going to share with you the ones that I've used 5 or more times, and I actually have 5 eyeshadow palettes that I reached for 5 times. Just to preface, I am usually reaching into a minimum of 3 eyeshadow palettes every time I do my makeup. I just love a variety. I don't typically just reach into one eyeshadow palette to create one look. I know that many of you do prefer to just reach into one eyeshadow palette. I like a variety. We're all different, right? Alright, so let's talk about the eyeshadow palettes that I reached for 5 times. First, I have 2 eyeshadow palettes from Natasha Denona. These are obviously both minis. I have both the mini gold as well as the mini nude. The mini nude I rely on quite a bit if I am in a rush and just trying to create a really simple look for work. I still want something on my eyes, but I want something super easy, and usually then I will just reach into this eyeshadow palette. Occasionally I will also like create a different look from a different eyeshadow palette, but reach into this palette for the shade Sienna, which I think is the most beautiful like green brownie red shade. It's the most beautiful shimmer, but I did reach for this a total of 5 times, and then I also reached for my mini gold 5 times as well. I was having a ton of fun with greens the last 3 months, and I reached into this quite a bit for these 2 shimmer shades, and I actually paired this palette a lot with my Natasha Denona larger gold palette, which we'll get into later. I used that quite a few more times than 5. We'll get into that later, but yes, I did reach for the mini gold 5 times. This one had not gotten a lot of love from me this year until the last few months. August was part of the last few months, and I reached into my Huda Coral palette a total of 5 times, and I actually did hit pan on a shade in this palette as well. I absolutely love this palette. You guys would have heard me mention this in my eyeshadow palette wardrobe tag as a palette that always comes traveling with me. This is just like the pinnacle of a summer palette in my opinion. I love everything about this palette, and even though there are only 9 shades, this is one of the more versatile of the 9-pan palettes that Huda has created in my opinion. I feel like I can reach into this and get a variety of different shades. I love that there are quite a few mattes in this and just the 2 shimmers, and I feel like the mattes are like more different than some of the other eyeshadow palettes that she created. So you have your peaches, but you have a pink, you have a brown, you have a yellow, and I just absolutely love this palette. Reach for this guy 5 times. And then the final 2 that I reached for 5 times are new as of the last 3 months. So first up, I have the Rowan 1111 quad, and I also picked up the 75 degrees. The 75 degrees I reached for 4 times. This one I reached for a total of 5 times. I freaking love the Rowan quads, and I hope they release more. These are just so fun. I know that they're expensive, but I find that their texture is so unique, and the look that you get on the eyes is just absolutely stunning. I've been having a ton of fun with mauve tones lately, so naturally I've just been gravitating towards this palette. This shade right here is a favorite of mine, and I know I'm going to continue to reach for this one a ton. And then I also picked up the Kaleidos Escape Pod, and I have reached into this a total of 5 times. I have used just about every shade in this palette. I think the only shades that I have not used are the bright orange and the bright pink. Everything else is amazing. I can say it's amazing. I've used everything else. The mattes are truly so buttery and easy to work with. Right now I'm saving up my pennies from my Poshmark so that I can purchase some of the Kaleidos 5-pan palettes, because using this palette just made me want to try basically everything from the Kaleidos brand. I have been trying to support more indie brands, and I was so impressed by this. I have been having a lot more fun experimenting a little bit with color this year. I've definitely stepped outside of my comfort zone some, and definitely been creating and playing around a lot more with color, and I just feel so creatively inspired when I reach in and look into this palette. And this is another one, even though it kind of doesn't necessarily look like your typical like fall or winter palette, really if you like look at these 2 rows, like I feel like I can do so much with these 2 rows for the fall still, so I anticipate I will continue to reach into this one a ton. Alright, next we're going to be moving into the 6 to 10 range, and I have 9 eyeshadow palettes to share with you here. The bulk of them are Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes, and as I was going through and starting to kind of compile where I'm at with each of my palettes for the year, I have found that a lot of my ABH palettes do have a lot of the higher uses for my collection. But starting with my ABH Amrezy palette, I did reach for this guy a total of 6 times. I still would like to reach for this one more, and I really feel like I can have some fun with this bottom row for the fall time, so I do want to make an effort to reach for this one a little bit more. I feel like this one has been neglected in the previous months. I pulled this into a Pan Those Eyeshadows just to focus on one of the shades, and I feel like that's why I reached for it 6 times, so I really want to make an effort to pull this in. Even some of these shimmers up here I think are just absolutely stunning for the fall time, so I anticipate I'll get some more use out of this in the coming months. I also reached for my Subculture a total of 6 times. So I have been working on the shade Electric in my Pan Those Eyeshadows series, and this is another very fall palette, but this is a palette that intimidates me, and is a palette that I don't love to reach for just because I know it's going to take a lot more time and effort to use this palette. So this one, I don't know. We'll see where this one ends at the end of the year with the amount of use that I have on it. I can tell you the reason I have been reaching for this is because it is in my Pan Those Eyeshadows. It's not a favorite, that is for sure. Next up we have my ABH Jackie palette. I reached for this one a total of 7 times. This is a palette that is truly a favorite in my collection, but as I have collected my data, I've realized that this is a palette that I hesitate to reach for, and I think it's because I know I'm not going to be able to get my hands on this if I use a shade up, and that's just silly. Like, it's silly to not use a palette that you absolutely love because you're afraid you're not going to be able to replace it. So I really want to make an effort to reach for this a lot more the last 3 months of the year. This is another one that just is absolutely stunning for the fall time from the like warm brown tones to the green to the reds to the purples. This is just a beautiful palette, perfect for the fall. I also reached for my Soft Glam, which is another staple in my collection, a total of 7 times. I know I'm going to reach for this a ton the last 3 months of the year. This is one, again, that I was like, why am I not reaching for this? Is it because I love this one so much? Well, I can replace this one, so stop being afraid to use it. So I'm going to stop being afraid to use this one, and I'm going to reach for this a lot more. I am very close to pan in these 2 shades right here. So my goal is to have pan in at least 2 or 3 shades in this palette by the end of the year, meaning I will be reaching for this one quite a bit more. I also reached for my Modern Renaissance a total of 7 times. This is one I think alongside my ABH Mario palette, I am going to potentially do like a pan that palette in 2021. And at the end of 2021, I think it is going to be time to declutter both my ABH Mario palette as well as my Modern Renaissance, just because they are getting to be older in my collection. So I really want to make sure that I am getting a ton of use out of these the next couple of months and then also next year before I finally decide that it's time for these to officially be decluttered. This next one is a favorite. I reached for this one 9 times. This is my Persona Identity 1 palette. I do have a pan in this palette, and this is just a staple in my collection. This is a palette that I will always want to have. You guys have heard me talk about this quite a bit on my channel. I think that these shimmers are outstanding. They are so impactful. They are so foiled and high shine. You do not need a wet brush, and then the mattes are just very, very easy to blend. I do know that she recently repackaged, so she has the like hard plastic for the Identity. I do have the older one, but I mean, it's still a phenomenal palette, and I know I will continue to get a ton of use out of that one. I also used my BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette a total of 9 times. This one is discontinued, but this is a favorite palette in my collection. I have talked about this so often on my channel, and even though this is more of a summer palette, I know that I will at least reach into this a few more times before the end of the year, because you guys know this one has some of my favorites for inner corner highlighting and then a couple of my favorite brown shades. So I just absolutely love this one. I always get a ton of use out of that. My ABH Mario palette, speaking of, got 10 uses, and this is one that I want to continue to use. I do have a pan on 6 of the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 shades in this palette. So I already have pan on half of the palette, and again, this is one that I think I'm going to do a pan that palette next year and just use the heck out of this. And then unfortunately it will be time to declutter this, even though I feel like I'm part of like the cool kids club because I own this palette. It's just getting to be so old, but this is such an easy palette to create looks out of. This is one that, again, it just screams fall to me, so I know I'll still get a ton of use out of this the next couple of months and then into next year as well. And then the last palette that got 10 uses from me was a new favorite. This is from Odin's Eye. It is their Solo Mane palette. I did do a dedicated review of this palette on my channel. I can link that for you guys. I have used every single shade in this palette a minimum of 3 times, and at this point it's probably more than that. I think every single shade in this palette, with the exception of this shade right here, which is like a blue with some shimmer, is phenomenal. I love this palette. The mustard yellow shade is like, could be one of my favorite shades, just shades in general, in my entire eyeshadow palette collection. I also absolutely love this lavender shade. I think it is so beautiful. It's so easy to work with, and I just love that I feel like they did something a little bit different with the color story here. Like, you're not going to get this color story from other eyeshadow palettes. I think that they were a little bit daring in some of the combinations that they tried to, or the combinations that they selected for this, and I'm very, very interested in picking up more from Odin's Eye. I compared this beautiful, like, shifty duochrome green shade to the shifty green shade from the Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction palette, and the two are very similar, and this is a fraction of the cost of the Pat McGrath. So I just highly recommend Odin's Eye. This beautiful, like, mauve-y, pinky, taupey shade reminds me a lot of vintage taupe from my Natasha Denona mini retro, which I love. So I can't get enough of this palette. This sits at my vanity. This is also going in a project, but I feel like this is just going to be like a permanent sits at my makeup desk because I love this so much. And especially this time of year, I've been reaching into that mustard shade so much, so this is definitely going to get a lot more use from me. I only have 2 eyeshadow palettes in my 11 to 15 range. In the 11 range, I did get a ton of use out of my Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. I did make a huge effort to get good use out of this during the August month, just because this palette just screams summer to me, and I wasn't sure how much use I would get out of this in the fall. However, looking at this, I feel like I can also still create quite a few beautiful looks for the fall with some of these more rich, like, yellows and oranges, and then the shimmers are just absolutely beautiful. I mean, Natasha Denona just kicks it out of the park. So I used this one 11 times, and then my Natasha Denona Gold palette was going in a project, but I have reached for this a ton for not only the shade that was going in my project, which was this blue shade, but I've reached into it for these greens, as well as this like more mustardy brown I have absolutely loved. And some of the other browns, I mean, this palette is starting to look a lot more loved. I reached for this a total of 15 times, and this palette screams fall. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection. I know I'm going to get a ton more use out of this, even though this is no longer going in my Pan Those Eyeshadow series, which that's kind of a spoiler for tomorrow's video. This is still going to sit at my vanity because I can't get enough of this palette lately. So love the Natasha Denona Gold palette. I recently ranked all of my Natasha Denona palettes. If you guys are interested in that, that was the first video, I believe, during palette week, so that'll be linked below, as well as my palette playlist. But both of these, tons of love. Next up, we have the 16 to 20 range, and I have 2 more palettes to share for that. Up first, we have another Natasha Denona. I used the heck out of my Natasha Denona collection over the course of the last 3 months, but this one, specifically the Mini Retro, was going in a project, specifically the shade Vintage Taupe, and I absolutely fell in love with this shade, but I also really love these 2 shimmers, and even this green. I am definitely anticipating that I will get some use out of that in the fall, because it just looks like the most beautiful, like, just like grayish green shade. I cannot wait to get some use out of this. I know I'm going to use this a lot more. I really have been enjoying the Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette. I did reach for this a total of 16 times. Majority of the times that I was reaching in, almost always, I was reaching for Vintage Taupe, but I did reach for the shade Pixie, or is it Galaxia? Galaxia? Whatever this shade is, reach for that a ton too. My whole Natasha Denona mini palette collection, like, if you look at it, you can just tell it gets so much love. And then the other palette is this one from Dose of Colors, which has also gotten just so much love for me just in its lifetime with me. I reached for this 20 times the last 3 months. This is one of the palettes in my entire collection that has probably gotten some of the most love this whole year. This is, if I didn't mention, the Dose of Colors Baked Browns. As you can tell, it already has 2 pretty large pans in it. I anticipate I might hit pan in this shade as well before the end of the year. This is another one that's just really easy for me to just grab this and go if I need a very simple or a very quick look for work, or if I was like running to my mom's for the day, I would grab this palette and like get ready in the car. Obviously my husband would be driving, but this is just an absolute staple in my collection. Highly recommend the Dose of Colors 5 pans. I just think they're so easy to work with. They are very powdery, so if you don't like a powdery formula, again, this would probably be a skip, but I can't get enough of this one. All right, you guys, and then to wrap it up, we have the 21 Plus Club. Hey, 21, legal to drink in the USA. When I was 19, I drove to Canada just so I could drink legally. Fun fact. The mowing is starting. Are we even surprised? Are we even surprised? Good thing we're almost done with this. And then I think I might go shopping. Not having the best day up here, so obviously retail therapy. I'm gonna go for a walk first, though, and just like jam out to my music to save some money. Okay, it's really, the mowing's getting closer. We better wrap this up. Okay, I have 2 palettes in the 21 Plus Club. Up first, we have my ColourPop Peach Perfect palette. This isn't like a favorite palette, but this has been in my Pan Those Eyeshadows in some capacity literally the whole year. So I have 3 pans in this. I used this 22 times the last month. This is going to end up as one of my most used palettes of the year. And again, it's not a favorite. I do like it, but I'm not reaching for peach shadows like every single day. But it's been in my pan, those eyeshadows, quite a bit. And I have reached for this 23 times in just the last 3 months. And then also my Colored Rain Queen of Hearts. I had this in a project, in my Pan of Every Color project. And then immediately after, it got rolled into my Pan Those eyeshadows. So I have used this eyeshadow palette a total of 23 times. I am currently still working on it in my Pan Those eyeshadows. Spoiler alert again for tomorrow's video. But this again is another very fall-esque palette, so I anticipate I would have gotten a lot of use out of it anyway. I have been craving mauve tones, if you couldn't tell from my eyes today. Use the Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction palette. No, Bronze Mothership Rose, Divine Rose, like the 6-pan. But I've been craving mauve tones. I think it's because I had to really lean into mauves to get use out of that vintage taupe shade in my mini retro from Natasha Denona, and then I just was reminded as to like how much I freaking love mauves. So I anticipate I will get a ton more use out of this. This may end up being, again, one of my most used palettes of the year. Obviously, some of my most used aren't going to be my absolute favorites, but they're going to be palettes that were part of my projects, etc. And when I'm so excited for the wrap up. When I do the wrap up, we're going to talk about pretty much every single eyeshadow palette, and we're going to talk about my least used, and I'll give my thoughts on like my most used and whether or not it is like truly a favorite. It's just going to be so fun to wrap that up. What else was I thinking? I had another thought, you guys. It's completely escaped me. Oh, I remember. If you are interested in seeing my palette collection, I will update it before my like end of year palette week. I will do an updated palette collection because it has changed quite a bit from the beginning of the year. But I do have a palette collection from the beginning of the year if you want to see that. Again, my palette collection has changed quite a bit, especially because I have purchased quite a few palettes as of recently, as well as I have decluttered, I would say probably close to 20 throughout the course of the year. But if you're interested in like a general idea of my palette collection, that video will be linked. But that is going to wrap it up for today's video. This quarterly palette uses, this quarterly palette usage update. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I would love to hear from you guys in the comment box. I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. I don't know if I'm confused today or if the mowing is just distracting me, but I would love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. What palettes do you feel like you've gotten the most use out of recently? So many of you guys commented in my Natasha Denona palette video that I needed. You didn't say needed, but like basically needed the Biba palette. So that's on its way to me and I'm super excited. It's supposed to be arriving today. And that's just a complete side note. Anyway, you guys, tomorrow's wrap up for palette week is going to be a Pan Those eyeshadows update. Thank you guys for all the love on palette week. Thank you guys for all the love you always give me. Always. I love you guys so much. I hope you're having a phenomenal day. And I will catch you in tomorrow's video. Bye.